What would you do if the people you loved most became the ones who tried to destroy you? Today on Her Shattered Voices, you'll hear a story that will break your heart and test your faith in family. But before we begin, I want to know your voice too. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were in her place? And if this story touches you even a little, don't forget to like this video so more people can hear her shattered voice. If you're rewatching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you this story. The day started like any other, or at least that's what I believed when I first opened my eyes. The morning light filtered through my curtains in soft streaks, and for a moment, there was a fragile sense of peace in the air. I clung to it, not knowing that within hours my world would shift in ways I could never have imagined. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every sense, the kind of day where you expect nothing remarkable, nothing unusual, just the rhythm of chores, errands, and family routines. My son Benjamin was at work, his wife Clara had been home preparing things for him, and I, as always, busied myself with small tasks around the house. I had no warning, no sign, no whisper of the storm that was about to consume us. Then came the knock on my door. Sharp, hurried, almost anxious. When I opened it, Clara stood there holding a lunchbox. At first glance it seemed perfectly ordinary, the kind of container every household uses without a second thought. She smiled, her expression polite but slightly strained, and explained that she had mixed up Benjamin's lunchbox by accident. She claimed she had packed two and somehow brought the wrong one to me. It was odd, but not suspicious, not then. Accidents happen after all. I accepted the lunchbox with gratitude, never questioning her words. She looked so convincing, so natural. Her hands didn't tremble. Her voice didn't falter. If there was guilt in her eyes, I didn't see it. How could I? This was my daughter-in-law, the woman my son loved and trusted. Why would I ever think she could betray us? When I placed the lunchbox on my table, I had no idea that it contained more than food. I had no idea that inside it lay secrets that would shatter every illusion I had about the woman we had welcomed into our family. I remember opening it slowly, absent-mindedly, the way one does when expecting nothing. The lid came off with a faint click, and at first I saw only the neatly packed compartments. A sandwich, some cut fruit, a thermos of soup. But something felt off. There was an odor, faint but sharp, unlike anything I had smelled before. It was metallic, almost bitter, and it immediately set me on edge. Curiosity tugged at me, and with trembling hands I leaned closer. The sandwich looked fine, the fruit looked fresh, but the soup, the soup, carried an undertone that made my stomach churn. It wasn't spoiled, but it wasn't right either. Instinct, honed through years of motherhood and careful living, whispered that this wasn't just an innocent meal. Dread settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to consider what it could mean. But somewhere deep inside, a voice was already screaming. Something is wrong. Something is terribly, terribly wrong. I set the lunchbox down, my heart pounding. I tried to dismiss the thought, to tell myself it was nothing but an overactive imagination. After all, Clara had always been attentive, always eager to please Benjamin. She was charming, polite, even affectionate, at least on the surface. Could it be possible that I was overreacting? But then I remembered the times Benjamin had come home pale and exhausted, complaining of headaches, nausea, fatigue. He brushed it off as stress from work, poor diet, lack of sleep. And Clara, she always insisted on preparing his meals, fussing over his health, making sure he ate properly. The puzzle pieces began to shift in my mind, forming an image I didn't want to see. My breathing grew shallow, my hands clammy. I took one step back from the table, staring at the lunchbox as though it were a venomous snake. Could it be? Could Clara, the woman he loved, the woman I had come to call my own daughter, be trying to harm him? The thought was so monstrous, so vile, that I immediately scolded myself. No, it's impossible. You're imagining things. You're letting fear blind you. But the scent, the unease, the memories of Benjamin's unexplained illness, they refused to let me go. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I did the only thing I could think of. I called Benjamin. My voice shook as I asked if he had eaten yet, if Clara had given him food that morning. When he said yes, a wave of panic nearly made me drop the phone. I couldn't tell him what I suspected, not yet. Without proof, my words would sound insane. They would drive a wedge between him and me, and worse, they might push him deeper into Clara's grasp. I needed evidence. That night, when Benjamin came home looking weary again, I studied him closely. His skin was pale, his movements sluggish. He smiled, but it was a weak, tired smile. And when Clara placed dinner on the table, I felt my stomach twist into knots. Every bite he took felt like a countdown, every sip like a step closer to disaster. I excused myself quietly and slipped into the kitchen. There on the counter I saw containers, spices, ingredients she had used. My eyes scanned them desperately, searching for anything unusual. And then I saw it. A small vial tucked behind the jars, its label scratched off. Its contents a strange, crystalline powder. My hands shook as I picked it up. A chill raced through me. This wasn't a spice. This wasn't seasoning. I didn't know what it was exactly, but I knew it had no place in a kitchen. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there. But something held me back, something stronger than rage, fear. If I accused her without proof, she would deny it, twist the story, perhaps even accelerate whatever plan she had. And Benjamin, my poor Benjamin, might not believe me. He loved her too deeply, too blindly, so I slipped the vial into my pocket, my heart racing, and resolved to find out the truth. The following day, I took the vial to a friend of mine, a retired pharmacist who owed me a favor. He studied it carefully, his brows furrowing, his hands steady. When he looked up, his eyes carried a weight that made my knees weaken. "This," he said gravely, "is arsenic." The word rang in my ears like a death knell. My world tilted, the floor seemed to vanish beneath my feet. Arsenic. Poison. Clara wasn't just careless, she wasn't just cruel. She was trying to kill him. That I staggered home that day, the vial clutched in my trembling hand. Rage and despair tore at me, warring inside my chest. I wanted to run to Benjamin, to scream the truth in his face, to save him right then and there. But a colder, sharper voice whispered, "Be careful. If she realizes you know, she'll strike harder, faster. She won't hesitate." That I couldn't risk it. I needed help. Real help. That evening, after Benjamin had gone to bed, I contacted the authorities. It was the hardest call I've ever made, because it meant admitting out loud what my heart already knew, that my daughter-in-law was trying to murder my son. I explained everything, from the lunchbox to the vial, from Benjamin's mysterious illnesses to Clara's calculated behavior. The officer on the line listened carefully, his voice calm but firm. "We'll take care of this," he assured me. "But you must remain calm. Do not alert her. Let us handle the investigation." And so the nightmare began in earnest. For days, I lived in a torment of silence, pretending everything was normal while the police quietly gathered evidence. They monitored Benjamin's health, tested his blood, examined the food. Each result came back with the same chilling confirmation. Traces of poison, doses carefully measured to weaken but not kill immediately. Clara was clever. She had been stretching this out, perhaps to make his death look like illness, to hide her hand in the shadows. But now the shadows were lifting. I remember watching her during those days, observing every smile, every gesture, every word. To anyone else, she looked like a caring wife, attentive and loving. But to me, she was a serpent, coiled and ready to strike. Her eyes, once warm, now seemed cold and calculating. Her touch, once affectionate, now felt like venom seeping into my home. And Benjamin, oh my sweet Benjamin, remained oblivious. He trusted her, leaned on her, believed she was his protector. Watching him sit at the table, eating the very meals that were poisoning him, broke something inside me. I wanted to rip the plate away, to shield him with my body, to scream the truth. But I couldn't. Not yet. The police assured me that timing was everything. They needed her caught in the act, undeniable evidence that no lawyer could twist. They needed her confession, her downfall sealed by her own words. And so I played my role. I smiled when she smiled, I nodded when she spoke, I pretended not to notice the faint bitterness in the soup. Every night I prayed that my son would survive long enough for justice to catch up with her. Then came the moment that shattered the fragile balance. Benjamin collapsed one evening, right after dinner. His body convulsed, his lips turned pale, and he gasped for air. I screamed his name, my hands trembling as I tried to support him. Clara rushed forward, her face painted with panic, but in her eyes, I swear I saw it, a flicker of satisfaction. The ambulance arrived, the sirens blaring, lights flashing against the walls of my home. They carried him away, his body limp, his pulse faint. And Clara. Oh, she cried, she wailed, she clung to me as though her world had collapsed. To the neighbors, to the paramedics, she looked like a grieving wife. But I knew better that I knew this was exactly what she wanted at the hospital. They worked tirelessly, doctors and nurses fighting to keep him alive. I stood by, numb, my prayers silent screams in my head. Clara sat in the corner, her hands covering her face, her sobs echoing through the sterile halls. But when no one was watching, when her mask slipped for just a moment, I saw her lips curl into the faintest, cruelest smile, and in that instant my heart turned to stone. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This wasn't just fear. This was war. And I would not let her win. The night Benjamin collapsed marked the turning point of everything. It was as though a curtain had been pulled back, and the fragile illusion we had been living under shattered into jagged pieces. The doctors managed to stabilize him, but their faces carried the heaviness of grave concern. Words like poisoning, critical, and suspicious substances circled around me, and though they spoke softly, their meaning thundered in my ears as I sat in the waiting room, hands clenched tightly together, my knuckles white, my chest aching with the rhythm of a heart that refused to calm. Clara sat just a few seats away, her sobs muffled against a tissue. Anyone else would have been moved by her display, her shaking shoulders, her broken cries, but I had seen the smile behind her mask, the cruel flicker of satisfaction when she thought no one was watching. The rage that burned in me was almost unbearable. I wanted to leap across the room, to rip away her veil of lies and scream the truth. But I remembered the words of the inspector I had spoken to days earlier. Don't alert her. Let us gather the proof. And so I swallowed my fury, burying it deep within me. I played the grieving mother-in-law, holding my face in my hands, pretending to be lost in despair while inside. Every nerve in me was sharpened with determination. Hours later, Inspector Carter arrived. A tall man with a calm presence, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen more than his fair share of tragedies. His eyes met mine across the waiting room, and with the smallest nod, he signaled that the game had entered its final stage. I followed him into a quiet corridor, away from Clara's watchful eyes. His voice was steady but urgent. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "the toxicology reports confirm what we feared. Your son has been poisoned over an extended period of time. The traces are consistent with arsenic, the same substance you turned over to us." I closed my eyes briefly, my worst fears finally confirmed in cold, clinical words. "And Clara?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to remain strong. "She's the prime suspect. But we need her confession, or at least irrefutable evidence of her intent. Right now, she's hiding behind the role of the grieving wife. To the outside world, she looks innocent. But tonight we'll change that." I swallowed hard. "How?" "We need Benjamin's cooperation. If he's strong enough, we'll stage a scenario. Make her believe she succeeded. People like her, they reveal themselves when they think the game is won. That's when they talk, when they confess." My breath caught. "You mean make her think he's dead?" Carter's eyes were steady. "Yes. It's risky, but it may be the only way to get her to expose herself fully." The thought made my stomach twist. The idea of staging my own son's death, of watching Clara celebrate what she thought was her victory, it was almost too much to bear. But then I remembered Benjamin's pale face, his weakening body, the nights I had prayed he would survive. I remembered the vial of arsenic, the lunchbox, the cruel smirk that had haunted me. And I knew, if we didn't act now, she would win. That I nodded slowly, tears welling in my eyes. "Do it. Whatever it takes. Just don't let her destroy him." When Benjamin regained consciousness briefly, Carter explained the plan. My son, weak but resolute, agreed without hesitation. His eyes, though tired, burned with a fire I hadn't seen before. "If this is what it takes to end her games," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "then I'll do it. I don't care what it costs me. She has to be stopped." I held his hand, tears streaming down my cheeks. "My boy," I whispered, "you've suffered enough, but I promise you this ends tonight." And so the trap was set. That evening, Clara was allowed into the hospital room. Benjamin lay motionless, tubes connected, monitors beeping softly. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, his face pale as death itself. I sat by his side, clutching his hand, playing my role as the devastated mother. The doctors had briefed me, the monitors were rigged, and every detail was carefully orchestrated. Clara entered with a gasp, rushing to his bedside. Her eyes brimmed with tears, her voice quivered with sorrow. "Oh, Benjamin," she sobbed. "Please, please don't leave me." Her performance would have fooled anyone else but not me. Not anymore. Hours later, as night deepened and the hospital halls grew quiet, the final act unfolded. The doctors declared that Benjamin had passed away. The monitors flatlined, the machines were turned off, and the room was filled with the sound of my staged wails. I clutched my chest, shaking with grief that was only half pretend, while Clara collapsed onto the floor, screaming to anyone watching. She was the picture of devastation. But when she thought the room was empty, when she thought no one could hear, she leaned over Benjamin's body, her lips close to his ear, and whispered words that froze the blood in my veins. "Finally," she said softly, almost with relief, "it's over." My heart thundered in my chest. The words we had been waiting for, the confession hidden in her breath. She thought she had won, thought she had silenced him forever. But she was wrong. Behind the glass, the hidden cameras recorded every word, every expression, every damning syllable. Inspector Carter and his team listened, their faces grim but satisfied. Clara had just sealed her own fate. That I looked at Benjamin. His still form, his closed eyes, the strength it took for him to play dead while his wife whispered betrayal into his ear. My son, my precious boy, had endured enough. And soon justice would finally be ours. But as I sat there, watching the woman who had tried to kill him, a thought burned in the back of my mind. Would justice be enough? Or would I forever carry the scars of this nightmare? Knowing how close I came to losing him? The hours after Benjamin's death felt like a surreal dream, one stitched together with grief, rage, and the cold machinery of justice. Clara believed she had won. She believed her husband was gone forever, and she thought her future, his inheritance, his freedom from our family, her carefully laid plans, was secured. But what she didn't know was that the walls were closing in around her, and every word she uttered was being captured, recorded, preserved as the rope that would tighten around her own neck. I sat quietly in the observation room the following morning, staring through the one-way glass at Clara as she sat in the interrogation chamber. She wore a simple blouse, her hair disheveled, her eyes swollen from supposed tears. To anyone else, she would look like a grieving widow, a woman broken by tragedy. But I saw something different. I saw calculation. I saw someone who had lived so long behind masks that she could summon grief like an actress on command. Benjamin, still hidden away under protection, was alive, though weak. Only a handful of people knew. Even I was kept from him for now, so that Clara's illusion would remain intact until the final act. The ache of not being able to touch his face, to reassure myself that he was truly breathing, gnawed at me like a constant wound. But I reminded myself over and over, this was the price of justice. Inspector Carter entered the interrogation room, calm and deliberate, a folder of evidence in his hands. He sat across from Clara, studying her as one might study a puzzle with missing pieces. "Clara," he began, his voice even, almost gentle, "you've been through a terrible ordeal. We understand that grief can cloud judgment, that sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're in shock." Clara sniffled, nodding slowly. "I don't even know how to live without him," she whispered, her voice fragile, laced with sorrow. Carter slid a photograph across the table, an image of the vial I had discovered, the crystalline poison gleaming under the harsh light of the lab. "Do you recognize this?" Clara's eyes flicked to the photo, then back to Carter. Her lips parted, then closed again. She shook her head quickly. "No. I've never seen that before." "What is it?" "It's arsenic," Carter replied matter-of-factly. "The same substance found in Benjamin's blood work. The same substance hidden in your kitchen." Her face blanched, the color draining from her cheeks. "That's not mine. Anyone could have planted it there. Maybe his mother. She always hated me." The word struck me like a blade. Even now, with evidence laid before her, she turned her venom toward me. I clenched my fists in my lap, my nails digging into my palms, forcing myself to stay silent behind the glass. Carter didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "We also have this." He pressed a button, and the recording played. Clara's own voice filled the room. "Finally, it's over." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara froze, her face a mask of horror. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. "Explain that to me," Carter said softly, his tone sharp as a knife. Clara stammered. I didn't mean it like that. I was in shock. I wasn't thinking. You're twisting my words. But her voice cracked, betraying her. Carter let the silence stretch, the weight of her lies pressing down on her. Then, with deliberate precision, he laid photograph after photograph on the table. Benjamin's medical reports, the toxicology results, images of the meals she had prepared, the surveillance footage from our home. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin she had built for herself. Her facade began to crumble. Tears streamed down her face, but they no longer looked convincing. They were tears of desperation, not grief. Finally, with a trembling voice, she whispered, "You don't understand. I had no choice." Carter leaned in. "Then explain it to me. Help me understand." And that was the moment the dam broke. Her words spilled out in a torrent, each one darker than the last. She confessed to slipping small amounts of arsenic into Benjamin's food, carefully measuring the doses so that his decline would look natural. She admitted she had planned it for months, waiting for the perfect time to strike. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she sobbed. "I loved him, I really did. But he was holding me back. His mother." Her voice dripped with venom when she mentioned me. "She never accepted me. I couldn't live like that anymore. I wanted freedom, I wanted everything he had. His money, his name, the life I deserved." Her words were like poison to my ears, each syllable cutting deeper into me. She had looked me in the eyes for years, smiled at me, hugged me, called me mother. And all the while, she had been plotting to destroy the very heart of my life. Benjamin, hidden away, would hear this later. He would hear his wife admit that her love was nothing but a mask, that every kiss, every smile, every whispered promise had been a weapon in her arsenal. The thought of his pain made me want to storm into that room and tear her apart with my bare hands. But I stayed seated, silent, letting justice take its course. When the confession ended, Clara collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands. The weight of her own words hung in the air, undeniable, inescapable. The recording devices captured every syllable, every sob, every damning truth. Carter stood, gathering the files calmly. "Thank you for your honesty," he said coldly. "It will make the sentencing process much smoother." The door opened and officers entered, their footsteps firm, their faces expressionless. They pulled Clara to her feet, her wrists bound in cold steel cuffs. She screamed, begged, cursed, but it was over. The serpent had finally been caught. As she was led away, her eyes darted to the mirror. She knew I was there, watching. For the first time, her mask shattered completely. Gone was the charm, the pretense, the false affection. What stared back at me was pure hatred, unfiltered and raw. Her lips curled into a sneer, and she spat out words that chilled me to the bone. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but you'll regret this. Both of you will." Her voice echoed in my ears long after she disappeared from sight. The room grew quiet again. The storm finally passed. I pressed my forehead against the glass, my tears flowing freely. The weight I had carried for weeks, months, seemed to lift slightly, though the scars it left would never fade. That I thought of Benjamin, still hidden, still recovering, unaware that the woman he loved had just condemned herself with her own tongue. I thought of the battles yet to come, the trials, the healing, the rebuilding of our lives from the ashes she had left behind. But for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to breathe. Justice had begun. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and stale air, as if it had absorbed decades of secrets, betrayals, and shattered lives. I sat in the front row, my hands trembling in my lap, my eyes fixed on the heavy double doors where Clara would soon be let in. Weeks had passed since her arrest, but the wounds she inflicted on my family were still raw, bleeding with every breath I took. Benjamin, though alive, remained under strict protection, his health fragile, his spirit fractured by the truth he now carried like a stone on his chest. He had not yet been permitted to face her, and in some ways I was grateful. The betrayal of a lover is a wound far deeper than any dagger could inflict. The whispers in the gallery grew louder as the bailiff's command sliced through the air. "All rise." Everyone stood, the shuffle of shoes echoing off the walls as Judge Whitmore entered, his black robe flowing like a shadow. His presence was commanding, his gaze sharp, the kind of man who carried authority not with his volume but with the sheer weight of his silence. Then she appeared, Clara. Her wrists were shackled, though the chains were discreet beneath her neatly pressed suit. She had abandoned the performance of grief. No tears today, no trembling hands. Instead, she walked with her chin lifted high, her eyes hard as stone, as though she still believed she could outwit the system, outmaneuver the truth. The snake had shed its skin once more, but beneath the new surface, I saw the same venom glistening. She looked around the courtroom, her gaze sweeping over the rows of faces, until her eyes locked on mine. For a fraction of a second, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not of warmth but of defiance. It was her way of reminding me, "You may have cornered me, but I will never bow to you." I clenched my fists tighter, whispering a prayer under my breath. The trial began. The prosecution laid out the story piece by piece, weaving a tapestry of her deceit so thorough that even the most sympathetic juror would struggle to find pity. The vials of arsenic, the toxicology reports, the surveillance footage, the recordings of her voice, cold, calculated, dripping with malice. Every fragment of evidence painted a picture of a woman who had loved nothing but her own ambition. And then came the confession. Played aloud for all to hear, her own words filled the courtroom, echoing like the voice of a ghost. I couldn't live like that anymore. I wanted freedom. I wanted everything he had. The murmurs in the room grew louder. People leaned forward, their faces etched with disbelief. How could anyone speak so casually about destroying a man's life? How could a wife plot so meticulously to poison the very person she vowed to cherish? Clara sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She neither flinched nor wept. If anything, she seemed to wear the silence like armor, daring anyone to pierce it. Then the defense rose. Her attorney, a sharp man with slicked back hair and a voice that carried just the right note of practiced sincerity, argued that Clara was a victim of circumstance. That she had been emotionally manipulated by a domineering mother-in-law, me. That her so-called confession was nothing but the ramblings of a woman pushed past her breaking point. That I felt the blood rush to my face, my vision blurring with fury. How dare he? How dare she twist the knife further by painting me as the villain? For years, I had done nothing but try to hold my family together, even when I suspected her smiles were false. But I said nothing. The truth was not mine to shout. It was in the evidence. It was in Benjamin's hollow eyes, his frail body. It was in the 3 crumpled bills she had once left in that lunchbox, a symbol of her disdain, a message of cruelty she had thought would never be uncovered. The trial dragged on day after day, each witness adding another brushstroke to the portrait of Clara's darkness. Nurses testified about Benjamin's mysterious decline. Neighbors spoke of her sudden bursts of temper, her carefully hidden bitterness. Forensic experts explained the slow, deliberate poisoning, and then came the day Benjamin himself appeared. The air seemed to leave the room when he entered, thin and pale but standing tall, his hand gripping the railing for strength. My heart nearly burst at the sight of him. My son, my flesh and blood, alive and breathing despite everything. He glanced at me, and for the first time in months our eyes met. In that moment, a flood of memories crashed through me. His first steps, his laughter as a boy, the way he used to hug me so tightly as though I was his whole world. That he turned his gaze to Clara, and the courtroom fell utterly silent. For the first time her mask cracked. Her lips trembled, her eyes flickered with something. Fear, longing, perhaps even shame. But Benjamin's face was unreadable, carved from stone. His voice, though weak, carried with the weight of truth. He spoke of the meals that tasted slightly bitter, of the fatigue that grew worse with every passing week, of the trust he had placed in his wife. And then he spoke of the night he realized, when his own mother's discovery of that vial had saved him from certain death. "She was supposed to love me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But she loved only herself." The words hung in the air like a final verdict before the jury had even spoken. I could feel my body trembling, my chest tight with grief and pride all at once. My son had faced his betrayer not with rage, but with the quiet power of truth. And that truth was stronger than any lie Clara could weave. When he stepped down from the witness stand, Clara's eyes followed him with an intensity that made my skin crawl. There was no remorse there, no apology, only a burning fire, a silent promise that this battle was not yet over. And in that moment I realized something chilling. Clara was not merely fighting for her freedom. She was fighting for her legacy, her ability to leave behind destruction, even if she could no longer control it. She would use every weapon, every loophole, every ounce of cunning she had left. The trial had become more than a search for justice. It had become a war. And wars are never clean. The trial entered its most dangerous stage. Evidence had been laid out, witnesses had spoken, and the world had seen the mask torn from Clara's face. Yet somehow she remained unbroken. Where others might have cowered under the weight of so much proof, Clara thrived on it. It was as though the courtroom itself had become her stage, and every gasp, every murmur from the gallery was the applause she secretly craved. I sat through it all, my nails digging into my palms, my body stiff from hours on those wooden benches. Each day I woke with a pit in my stomach. Each night I prayed for strength I wasn't sure I had left. Benjamin's recovery was slow, fragile as porcelain. I knew the trial drained him more than he admitted. But he came day after day, facing the woman who had stolen years of his life and nearly his very soul. Clara's defense grew more vicious as the weeks stretched on. Her attorney painted her as a misunderstood wife, a woman driven by emotional neglect. He spoke of her childhood wounds, her insecurities, her so-called loneliness in the marriage. And then, like poison laced in honey, he turned the spotlight onto me. "Isn't it true," he thundered during cross-examination, "that you were overbearing in your son's life? That you never truly welcomed Clara into the family? That your constant interference created tension in the marriage?" The words hit me like stones. My throat tightened, my hands shook. For a moment I felt stripped bare before the room. Yes, I had been cautious of Clara from the beginning. Yes, I had felt something cold behind her smiles. But was that interference or instinct? Benjamin rose from his seat before I could respond, his voice ringing clear despite the judge's gavel demanding order. "Do not blame my mother for my wife's sins," he said, his eyes blazing. "If not for her, I would be dead." The courtroom erupted, the judge pounding for silence. But in that moment my heart swelled with a bittersweet pride. My son, my precious boy who had been so blind, finally saw the truth. Yet Clara did not falter. She sat with perfect composure, her lips curving into a faint, mocking smile. The kind of smile that said, "You think you've won, but I am not finished." Days later, the prosecution unveiled their final witness, Inspector Carter. Calm and unshakable, he recounted the sting operation that had caught Clara's whispered confession, the vial of arsenic discovered in her possession, the carefully documented timeline of Benjamin's poisoning. His words were steady, precise, undeniable. For the first time I saw Clara's jaw tighten, a crack in the armor. But she recovered quickly. When it was her turn to speak, she rose with an elegance that chilled me. She looked directly at the jury, her voice smooth, her tone almost maternal. "I loved my husband," she said, her eyes shimmering with false tears. "Everything I did out of desperation, out of fear, out of being silenced. You cannot understand what it is to live under constant scrutiny, to feel invisible in your own marriage. Perhaps I made mistakes, but I am not the monster they paint me to be." Her words hung in the air like smoke, twisting, suffocating. I watched the jurors' faces, searching for signs of doubt, for cracks in their resolve. And to my horror I saw it: hesitation. A young woman on the jury bit her lip, her brow furrowed. An older man shifted in his seat, his eyes softening ever so slightly. Clara was winning them. Fear gripped me like icy hands. Could she truly escape? Could she twist her venom into sympathy and walk free, leaving us shattered in her wake? That night I could not sleep. I paced my home, the shadows of memory closing in on me. I saw Benjamin's frail body, the lunchbox with its cruel message, the sound of her whisper, "Finally, it's over." I replayed every moment, every red flag I had ignored. And I asked myself the question that haunted me: had I failed my son? But then I remembered his words in court, his defiance, his strength. I remembered the vow I had made, the vow that she would not win. The closing arguments arrived like the final act of a brutal play. The prosecution's words were sharp as knives. "This is not the story of a neglected wife. This is the story of a predator who saw her husband not as a partner, but as an obstacle. She wanted his freedom, his wealth, his life. And she nearly succeeded." Then the defense countered, painting Clara as the victim once more, begging the jury to see her humanity. Finally, the judge's instructions were given, and the jury retreated. The waiting began. Hours dragged into a full day. Each tick of the clock gnawed at my nerves. Benjamin sat quietly beside me, his hand in mine, his face pale but resolute. "Clara, even in her shackles, radiated a disturbing calm. She leaned back in her chair as though she were lounging in her own living room, as though she could bend fate to her will. When the jury returned, the room grew so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. The foreman stood, paper in hand, voice steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant." The pause stretched like an eternity. My breath caught, my soul suspended in the air. "Guilty on all counts." The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, cries of relief. My knees buckled, tears streaming down my face as Benjamin pulled me into his arms. For the first time in months, I felt the crushing weight on my chest lift, replaced by a flood of gratitude so fierce it nearly drowned me. But across the room, Clara stood slowly, her eyes narrowing, her lips curving into a smile so dark it sent a shiver down my spine. Even in defeat, she found a way to terrify as the guards led her away. She turned her head just enough to meet my eyes. Her mouth formed silent words only I could read. "This isn't over." And in that chilling promise I knew our nightmare had not yet ended. The day Clara was taken away in chains should have marked the end of everything. The end of fear, of betrayal, of sleepless nights haunted by the thought of losing my son. And for a moment it did feel like freedom. The courtroom emptied, the press swarmed, people whispered of justice served. Benjamin and I stepped outside into the crisp air, and I breathed deeply as if tasting life for the first time in months. But peace is fragile. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the echo of Clara's silent words burning into my mind. This isn't over. They looped through my thoughts like a curse, robbing me of rest. Even locked away, even defeated, her presence lingered like smoke in a room that could never be cleared. Benjamin tried to reassure me. "She's gone, Mother. She can't hurt us anymore." He held my hands, his own still thin and trembling from his long recovery. We survived. And though I smiled, though I nodded, deep inside I wasn't certain. For some wounds don't vanish when the knife is removed. They throb, they scar, they whisper reminders long after the bleeding has stopped. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, Benjamin began to heal. The poison that had coursed through his veins had left lasting damage, but with time and care he grew stronger. I watched him return to small routines, walking through the garden, sitting by the piano, laughing quietly at old memories. There were days when I thought the shadow had finally lifted, when I could almost believe that we could live again. But then came the letters. The first arrived in an unmarked envelope, slipped through the mail slot on a windy afternoon. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing only a single sheet of paper. On it were 3 words written in Clara's unmistakable hand. "Still watching you." The paper fell from my grasp, my chest tightening, my breath shallow. How? She was behind bars. She couldn't reach us. And yet the words were here in my home, like a ghost had passed through the locked doors. That I didn't tell Benjamin at first. He had suffered enough, and I couldn't bear to see fear cloud his fragile recovery. Instead, I burned the letter in the fireplace, watching the flames consume her handwriting. But the ashes did not erase the dread. More letters followed, some short, some long. Promises of revenge, twisted reflections of love, even drawings of lunchboxes with mocking little notes scrawled inside. Each one arrived with no return address, no fingerprints, no traceable origin. The police assured me Clara had no access to send them, that it must be the work of someone else, an accomplice perhaps, or a sympathizer. But in my heart I knew. These words were hers. Benjamin eventually found out when he caught me clutching one letter in the kitchen, tears streaming down my face. He read it silently, his jaw tightening, his eyes dark with anger. "She won't win," he said firmly, tearing the paper into shreds. "She can't haunt us forever." But his voice betrayed him. Beneath his defiance, I heard the same fear that had rooted itself in me. Life moved on, but never as it once had. Every creak of the house at night made me jolt. Every stranger's glance lingered too long. Every lunchbox, every meal carried a whisper of suspicion. I had to remind myself daily that she was gone, that she could not touch us. And yet, there were sightings. Neighbors swore they saw a woman with Clara's hair near the old grocery store. A man swore he caught her reflection in a passing car window. None of it could be proven, none of it confirmed, but the whispers spread like wildfire, feeding the legend of the woman who had once lived behind a mask of charm. The final blow came one winter evening, when Benjamin returned from the hospital after another checkup. He looked healthier, stronger, almost like his old self. We shared tea by the fire, laughter filling the room for the first time in months. Then, as he reached for another biscuit, he froze. His hand hovered over the plate, his eyes narrowing. "Mother," he said quietly, "did you make this tea?" "Yes," I replied, my voice uncertain. He picked up the cup, held it beneath his nose, inhaled slowly. Then with a sharp movement he set it down. "There's something in it." My blood ran cold. I tasted the tea myself, and though faint, there was a bitterness on my tongue. Familiar. Haunting arsenic. The police swarmed the house within the hour. The cups, the kettle, everything was seized. But no trace of intrusion was found. The doors had been locked, the windows sealed. No one had entered. And yet, the poison was there. Benjamin looked at me with haunted eyes. "She's still here," he whispered. That I didn't argue. I knew he was right. Clara was behind bars, yes, but her shadow was free, stretching long and dark over every part of our lives. Whether through accomplices, through letters, through the sheer terror she had planted in our minds, she had ensured one thing. We would never truly be rid of her, and so here I sit now, writing these words as the fire crackles beside me. Benjamin sleeps upstairs, his breath shallow but steady. I pray each night that he will wake, that tomorrow will bring healing, that one day we might live without fear. But deep down, I know the truth. Some stories don't end with a gavel strike. Some nightmares don't fade with daylight. Clara may wear shackles, but the chains she bound around our souls remain, and sometimes, when the night is still, when the wind rattles the windows and the shadows shift across the walls, I swear I can hear her voice again, soft, cold, unyielding. "This isn't over."